Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Clara Morgan. For years, we've been told a story about retirement that sounds perfectly logical on the surface, but if we're honest, it carries a heavy weight of anxiety. It's the idea that your spending will hit a peak the moment you retire, dip during your slow-go years, and then sharply spike toward the end of your life, driven almost entirely by the rising cost of healthcare. This U-shaped trajectory has a name, the spending smile. But today, I want to share something that might change how you breathe when you look at your accounts. Even the creator of the spending smile research has begun to refine the narrative. When we move away from broad mathematical models and look at how real American households are actually moving their money in the year 2026, that smile starts to vanish. If you've been losing sleep wondering if you've saved enough to cover a massive surge in costs at age 85, this conversation is for you. Planning around the wrong assumptions doesn't just cause unnecessary stress, it can lead you to oversave by hundreds of thousands of dollars, effectively robbing your younger, healthier self of experiences you could afford right now. Today, we're going to look at where this concept came from, why it's so widely misunderstood, and what the most current data tells us about the reality of your future spending. The concept of the retirement spending smile gained traction in the mid-2010s, largely popularized by the respected researcher David Blanchett. His work, such as Estimating the True Cost of Retirement, was a landmark in financial planning. I want to be very clear. I have immense respect for David's contributions. I recently had the chance to discuss this with him, and he was incredibly direct about a nuance that often gets lost in translation. The original smile was built on average data, not median data. In the world of statistics, that distinction is everything. Averages are easily skewed by outliers, a small number of people with extreme circumstances, like a multi-million-dollar medical bill or an unusually high inheritance spend. These outliers pull the average up, making the typical experience look much more expensive than it actually is. David was transparent about this from the start. It wasn't a mistake, it was simply the best framework available at the time. However, because so many retirees have anchored their entire lifestyle to this smile curve, David revisited the research. As of early 2026, he has released updated findings based on median data, which provides a much clearer mirror for the typical American retiree. To understand the update, we have to look at the original U-shape: high spending at the start, a dip in the middle, and then a rise. But here's the part most people get wrong. Even in the original data, that late life rise never actually returned to the high spending levels of early retirement. It was a modest uptick, not a return to peak spending. Furthermore, that curve was built on cross-sectional data. This means researchers looked at a group of 60-year-olds and a group of 80-year-olds at the same time and compared them. It didn't track the same family over 20 years. When we track the same household year over year, we see a very different story, one of a steady, natural decline. Let's step away from the academic surveys and look at what's actually happening in our bank accounts. Some of the most compelling evidence we have today comes from J.P. Morgan Asset Management. They didn't use surveys. They analyzed millions of de-identified credit card and banking records from real retired households. The data revealed a consistent trend. Real spending declines steadily as we age. Think about the neighbors in your community. A couple in their early 60s might be renovating the kitchen, traveling to see grandchildren, dining out frequently. Fast forward 20 years, by the time that same couple reaches their mid-80s, their lifestyle has naturally simplified. The data shows that households aged 80 to 84 spend significantly less than those in their early 60s, often 30% less in inflation-adjusted terms. On average, we see a decline of about 5 to 8% in real spending every 5 years. This isn't a sign of running out of money, it's a sign of changing priorities. As we age, we often travel less, we eat smaller meals, and our stuff is already bought. While healthcare might take up a larger percentage of the monthly budget later in life, the total amount of money leaving the bank account continues to drop. There is no systematic rebound in spending for the median retiree. The smile is actually more of a gentle downward slope. So, if the smile is a myth for most, why does it persist? It persists because of one very real, very valid fear: long-term care. This is the tail risk that pulls the averages up. While most people spend less as they age, a small percentage of people hit a financial cliff due to nursing home stays or memory care. To plan effectively, we need to stop looking at this as a giant dark cloud and start looking at the actual numbers provided by the Urban Institute, which tracks observed behavior over entire lifetimes. Here's the breakdown of what actually happens to 100 retirees. First, 52% of retirees, more than half, will never spend a single dollar on paid long-term care. Their care is either unnecessary or provided by family. That leaves 48% who will have some expenses. If we look closer at that group, the low-cost group, about 12% of retirees will spend less than $30,000 total over their entire life. This usually covers short-term help after a surgery or a few weeks of home health aid. The mid-cost group, about 20% will spend between $30,000 and $300,000. This is a broad range, often involving a few years of intermittent help or a shorter stay in a rehab facility. The high-cost group, this is the 15% we all fear. These are the individuals who spend over $300,000, usually due to extended stays in memory care or chronic nursing needs. When you hear that spending rises at the end of life, you are hearing the story of that 15%. They are the ones pulling the average up for everyone else. But 85% of retirees do not experience that surge. The reason this data matters is that fear is a terrible financial advisor. When you live in fear of a worst-case scenario that only affects 15% of the population, you tend to over-restrict your life. You say no to the trip, no to the charity, or no to the gift for your children because you are guarding against a spike in spending that statistically is unlikely to happen. We need to reframe healthcare not as an inevitable explosion of costs, but as a manageable risk. For the median retiree, spending in your 70s and 80s will be lower than it is today. Even if healthcare costs rise, they are often offset by the fact that you aren't buying new cars, flying across the globe, or paying for a large home's upkeep. The evidence from JP Morgan, Vanguard, and Morningstar all point to the same conclusion. We spend the most when we are youngest and healthiest. As we move through retirement, our spending footprint naturally shrinks. How do we take this data and turn it into peace of mind? I suggest a strategy called the dedicated long-term care bucket. Instead of worrying about an infinite, unknown cost, let's put boundaries around the risk. Let's take that high-end number we discussed, $300,000, and assume you want that protected for a potential need at age 77. Why 77? Because data shows that's the typical entry point for significant care. If you are 60 years old today and retiring, you have 17 years before you likely need that money. If we assume a conservative 6% annual return, you only need to set aside about $111,000 today to have $300,000 ready by age 77. By earmarking that $111,000 into its own bucket, perhaps in a diversified but conservative portfolio, you have effectively insured yourself against the 15% risk. Once that bucket is set, you have something far more valuable than money. You have permission. You have permission to spend the rest of your nest egg. You can look at your other accounts and know that those dollars are for your enjoyment, your legacy, and your comfort right now, because the what if has already been answered. You've named the fear, quantified it, and put it in a box. The retirement spending smile wasn't wrong, but it was a partial truth that has caused a lot of unnecessary anxiety. It described an average that most of us will never actually experience. When we look at the reality of 2026, the median data, the real transaction records, and the actual habits of American retirees, we see a journey that is much more graceful. We see a slow, natural reduction in spending that allows for a simpler, more focused life as we age. My hope for you is that this data allows you to look at your retirement plan not as a defensive shield against a scary future, but as a tool to help you live fully today. You have worked hard for your independence. Don't let a statistical outlier tell you how to live your life. So, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Does the idea of a spending slope rather than a spending smile change how you look at your own savings? Does it give you a bit more breathing room? Please share your reflections in the comments below. I read them all, and they help us build a more thoughtful community here. If this perspective brought you some peace of mind, please consider sharing it with a friend who might be worrying about these same things. I'm Clara Morgan. Thank you for spending this time with me. I'll see you in the next video.